A billionaire spat on a girl in a wheelchair and violently yanked a horse's mane. But what happened in the next few seconds turned everything upside down. Watch until the end and get ready for the outcome. If you believe in justice, subscribe now and see what happened next. The morning sun gently caressed the extensive fields of Sunrise Ranch, newly opened for public events on the outskirts of Cedar Springs. The ranch, with its terracotta adobe walls and large colonial arches, had become a gathering point for families, children, and local visitors who assembled around beautiful horses, educational workshops, and equine therapy presentations. Mrs. Sarah Thompson, a respected therapist from the region, had organized this charity event with such care that every last detail shone with the warmth of her heart. The free admission allowed the entire community, especially people with disabilities, to participate freely in the various activities the ranch offered. The atmosphere was one of pure joy, with children's laughter mixing with the soft neighing of horses, creating a perfect symphony under the blue Colorado sky. However, that peaceful climate suffered a sudden change when the sound of a helicopter began to be heard getting closer and closer, interrupting the harmony of the place. Curious gazes turned toward the sky as the aircraft descended into the restricted area of the field, raising dust and murmurs among those present. The unexpected presence of one of the most influential businessmen in the country, Mr. Richard Wilson, known as much for his immense fortune as for his coldness in business, caused visible discomfort among the organizers. Mrs. Sarah pressed her lips with concern. The reason for that visit wasn't clear, but her intuition told her it wasn't about solidarity. "What is Mr. Wilson doing here? He wasn't invited," she whispered to her assistant, trying to maintain composure. While watching how the helicopter landed completely, the arrival of the real estate magnate was marked by an entourage of assistants and security personnel dressed in impeccable dark suits. Mr. Wilson's first attitude upon stepping on the ground was to look disdainfully around, as if everything was too small for his accustomed standard. He walked hurriedly, disinterested, his tailored suit contrasting with the simplicity of the rural environment. His impeccably polished Italian shoes seemed out of place among the grass and soil of the field. His eyes, cold as steel, scanned the place as if evaluating land for future construction rather than a community gathering space. Mr. Wilson advanced determinedly, ignoring respectful greetings, until something caught his attention. A girl in a wheelchair stopped near the fence that delimited the horse area. Lucy Miller, barely 12 years old, and with a smile that lit up the entire place, was completely absorbed in her connection with a light chestnut mare. The animal, named Hope by the caretakers, inclined its head toward the girl with remarkable gentleness, as if it had known her for a lifetime. The moment, which for any ordinary person would be moving, only provoked sarcasm on the millionaire's face. His lips curved into a contemptuous smile as he slowly approached them. Without prior warning, he walked up to the scene, cast an ironic look, and in a gesture that left the few nearby witnesses frozen, spat on the ground in front of Lucy. Then, with an abrupt movement, he yanked Hope's mane, like someone testing the resistance of any rope. "Are these the horses you brag so much about? Not worth half of what my thoroughbreds cost," he commented loudly, ensuring that several around him could hear. The act was as unexpected as it was offensive. For a brief moment there was absolute silence in the surroundings. Some people observed the scene but hesitated to intervene. The imposing figure of Mr. Wilson still inspired fear among the locals, many of whom worked in one of his numerous companies. Lucy didn't react verbally. Her gaze, however, remained firm, fixed on the businessman's eyes with surprising dignity for someone her age. She gripped Hope's reins more tightly, who took 2 steps back, as if perceiving the tension of the moment. The animal neighed softly, almost like a silent protest at the aggression received. Mr. Wilson turned away with contempt and continued his way toward an exclusive tent, ignoring everything around him as if nothing had happened. It was in that abrupt movement that a small metallic object fell from his pocket and rolled discreetly until stopping next to Lucy's wheelchair. A USB drive. The girl noticed it immediately, but before she could bend to pick it up, a silver-haired lady, who until then had been observing everything from a certain distance, calmly approached and took it from the ground. Mrs. Helen Robinson, a former teacher at the local school and respected by the entire community, delivered the device to Lucy with a silent conspiratorial, "Look, keep it safe, sweetie," she whispered, barely moving her lips. "Something tells me this is important." Lucy nodded slightly, hiding the USB drive in the small purse hanging from her wheelchair. An instant connection was established between the elderly woman and the girl, a bond forged in seconds, but that seemed destined to change many things. Meanwhile, Mrs. Sarah hurriedly approached, concerned about what she had just witnessed from afar. "Lucy, are you okay? Did that man bother you?" she asked with genuine concern, placing a protective hand on the girl's shoulder. "I'm fine, Mrs. Sarah," Lucy responded with surprising maturity. "Hope is also fine, just a little scared." The event organizer directed a concerned look toward the tent where Mr. Wilson had entered. "I don't understand what he's doing here. This event is for the community, for people who really value what we do with equine therapy," she commented with contained frustration. Mrs. Helen, who remained with them, spoke with the wisdom that only years can grant. "People like Mr. Wilson always have a purpose, Sarah, and rarely is it a good one. We must be vigilant." The rest of the morning proceeded with apparent normality, although the presence of the businessman and his companions had cast a shadow over the initial festive atmosphere. Mr. Wilson toured the facilities with gestures of disapproval, taking notes on his phone and speaking in whispers with his assistants. Occasionally, he cast calculating glances toward the surrounding lands, as if evaluating their potential for some unknown purpose. And when he finally left, almost 3 hours later, the relief was palpable among the organizers and participants. However, for Lucy and Mrs. Helen, the day was just beginning. The USB drive they now jealously guarded might contain information that neither of them imagined. That same afternoon, as the event's activity decreased and visitors began to leave, Lucy looked for Mrs. Helen. She found her sitting under the shade of a centuries-old oak tree, apparently absorbed in contemplation of the landscape. However, when their gazes met, the elderly woman made a discreet gesture, indicating for her to approach. "My child," said Mrs. Helen when Lucy arrived at her side, "do you have that object we picked up?" Lucy nodded, taking the USB drive from her purse. "I don't know what it might contain, but from the way Mr. Wilson has been acting today, it must be something important," the girl commented, with an intuition that was surprising for someone her age. "We need to find out," the elderly woman responded with determination. "Do you know the community library that's in the center of town?" Lucy nodded again. "My mom takes me there on Saturdays to read books while she shops at the market." "Perfect. We'll see each other there in an hour. It has old computers, but they'll serve our purpose. No one will suspect a grandmother and her granddaughter spending time together in the library." The plan was set, and as the sun began its descent toward the Colorado horizon, two unlikely allies prepared to discover what secrets that small device held that fate had literally placed at their feet. The Walt Whitman Community Library was a modest, yellow-walled building located in the heart of the town of Pine Creek, a few miles from Sunrise Ranch. Despite its humble appearance, it represented an invaluable treasure for local inhabitants, many of whom didn't have internet access in their homes. That afternoon, as the sky was tinged with orange and purple tones, Mrs. Helen arrived walking with serene steps. Her eyes, framed by wrinkles that told stories of an intense life, scanned the place until finding Lucy, who waited patiently near. The entrance, her wheelchair perfectly positioned under the shade of a blooming jacaranda. "You arrived early, sweetie," the elderly woman greeted with a warm smile, leaning to kiss the girl's cheek. "I'm always punctual, Mrs. Helen. My dad says being on time is a form of respect," Lucy replied, her eyes bright with anticipation. Together they entered the library, greeting Mr. Stanley, the white-mustached librarian who knew each neighbor by name. The man indicated with a smile the available computers, located in a discreet corner at the back of the place. The equipment was old, with bulky monitors that seemed to resist the passage of time, but worked well enough for users' basic needs. "We're going to pretend I'm helping you with school homework," Mrs. Helen whispered as they settled in front of one of the most distant computers. "If anyone asks, we're researching the history of horses in America for your science class." Lucy nodded, perfectly understanding the need for discretion. With hands slightly trembling from age but still agile, Mrs. Helen turned on the computer, patiently waiting while the old operating system started with a prolonged buzz. The internet connection was slow and unstable, as she had anticipated, but sufficient for their immediate purposes. When the screen finally showed the desktop, the elderly woman carefully inserted the USB drive into one of the side ports. "Now we'll see what's so important that Mr. Wilson carries it with him," she murmured, adjusting the reading glasses hanging on a chain over her chest. They waited a few moments while the computer recognized the device. When the window finally appeared showing the content, both leaned forward with curiosity. To their surprise, the pen drive contained several folders with cryptic names: Pricht RNCH, TRNSFR, FPHN, and Fink STMT, among others. "What does all this mean, Mrs. Helen?" asked Lucy, confused by the technical nomenclature. "They're abbreviations, my child. Project Ranch, transfers, something, and financial statements, if I'm not mistaken. Mr. Wilson is a businessman, after all," the elderly woman explained as she opened the first folder with a double click. Inside, they found PDF documents, spreadsheets, and some presentation files. Mrs. Helen opened one of the documents titled Transformation Project to Sunrise.pdf. What appeared on screen left them breathless. It was a detailed plan to convert Sunrise Ranch into a luxury tourist complex with a boutique hotel, golf courses, and exclusive residences. The document included architectural renderings, financial projections, and most disturbingly, an implementation calendar that began with the acquisition of the land in less than a month. But the ranch is a community center now. Mrs. Sarah always said it would be a space for everyone, especially for children like me who need equine therapy. Lucy stammered, her voice breaking slightly. "Wait, my child, there's more," Mrs. Helen responded, opening another folder. What they found there was even more shocking. Among confusing files and technical documents, there was a single file named strangely RDANML FNCS Dex LSX. Upon opening they faced an extensive digital dossier that detailed irregular financial movements, transfers to ghost accounts, and most seriously, the manipulation of public resources originally intended for social projects and accessibility. The documents, with digitized dates and signatures, revealed that a good portion of the funds raised for inclusion programs, like the event they had been at that very day, had been diverted to the personal accounts of Mr. Wilson and his close circle of collaborators. This is terrible," whispered Mrs. Helen, her face paling as she advanced through the pages of the file. "The money that should have been used to expand equine therapy services, to build access ramps, to bring specialists, all has been stolen." Lucy observed the screen in silence, her young eyes absorbing information she barely understood in its entirety, but whose gravity she could perfectly feel. "Is that why he came today? To see what he wants to destroy?" she finally asked, her voice small but firm. Not only that, my child, he came to evaluate his next conquest, the elderly woman responded bitterly. But what he doesn't know is that he just made a mistake that could cost him very dearly. They continued exploring the contents of the pen drive, discovering more details about the corruption scheme. There were emails saved in PDF format where Mr. Wilson instructed his subordinates on how to divert funds without raising suspicions, manipulated reports presented to local authorities, and even a list of public officials who had been bribed to facilitate the necessary paperwork. The initial shock was gradually transforming into determination. Mrs. Helen, who until then had maintained herself as a silent observer in the community since her retirement as a teacher, revealed to Lucy an aspect of her life that few knew. Before being a teacher, I worked for many years as an executive secretary in the Regulatory Commission for Social Investments. I know perfectly well how these matters work, and more importantly, I still maintain contact with old colleagues who now occupy positions of power. Lucy's eyes opened with surprise and admiration. "So you know what to do with all this?" she asked, pointing to the screen. "Exactly, my child. I know exactly what to do and who to contact, but we must be cautious and patient," the elderly woman responded as she extracted a small notebook from her purse and began to note names, telephone numbers, and key points of the discovered information. For now, the first thing is to make a backup of all this information. Carefully, Mrs. Helen extracted from her purse a USB drive of her own, simple-looking but functional. "I always carry one with me. You never know when you might need to save a cooking recipe or unmask a corrupt person," she commented with an astute smile that revealed a completely new side of the respectable former teacher. They transferred all the files to the new USB drive, a process that took them several minutes due to the slowness of the equipment. Once the copy was completed, Mrs. Helen saved her pen drive and returned Mr. Wilson's to Lucy. "We'll keep the original in a safe place, just in case. You never know when we might need it as additional evidence," she explained. As they prepared to leave the library, Mrs. Helen placed a wrinkled but firm hand on Lucy's shoulder. "What we've discovered today is very serious and could be dangerous if it falls into the wrong hands. That's why I want you to promise me something. You won't talk about this with anyone, not even with your parents for now. Do you promise me?" Lucy nodded solemnly. "I promise, Mrs. Helen. It will be our secret until you say it's time to talk." Upon leaving the library, the sky had already completely darkened. The stars shone intensely over the small town of Pine Creek, oblivious to the human intrigues developing under their silver light. Mr. Stanley said goodbye to them with a kind gesture, not suspecting that he had just witnessed the beginning of a silent revolution against one of the most powerful men in America. "I'll take you home," said Mrs. Helen as they began to advance through the central plaza of the town. "Your parents must be worried." "Don't worry. I let my mom know I would be with you. She trusts you more than anyone," Lucy responded with a smile. During the journey to Lucy's house, situated in a modest nearby neighborhood, they carefully planned the next steps. Mrs. Helen explained that she would discreetly contact former colleagues and strategically positioned friends, trusted people who could help without raising premature alarms. "In the coming days, we'll begin to pull the strings, but with such subtlety that Mr. Wilson won't feel the net closing until it's too late," the elderly woman explained with a gleam of determination in her tired eyes. Upon arriving in front of the small Miller family house, with its light blue painted walls and potted geraniums in the windows, Mrs. Helen said goodbye to Lucy with a warm hug. "Tomorrow you'll come with me to the ranch. We need to act normal, as if nothing has happened. Agreed?" Lucy nodded, perfectly understanding the importance of keeping up appearances. "I'll be ready early. And Mrs. Helen, thank you for trusting me." The elderly woman smiled tenderly. "You are braver and wiser than many adults will ever be, my child. Now rest, for the coming days will be intense." As she watched Lucy enter her home, where her mother received her with an affectionate hug, Mrs. Helen allowed herself a moment of reflection. At 75 years old, she had believed that her life would pass in the tranquility of old age, among books and coffee afternoons with friends. She never imagined that she would find herself in the middle of a fight against corruption and greed, protecting the future of children like Lucy and safeguarding a space that meant hope for so many families in the community. With determined steps, she set out toward her own house, a cozy home full of books and memories. She had important calls to make and a plan to begin weaving. The battle was just beginning, and although Mr. Wilson had the power of money and influence, they had something perhaps more valuable: the truth and the determination of those who fight for a just cause. The following days passed with an apparent calm that contrasted with the intense activity that Mrs. Helen coordinated from the shadows. The former teacher, now turned strategist of a silent revolution, had set in motion a meticulous plan that began to spread like an invisible spiderweb around Mr. Richard Wilson. The morning after their discovery in the library, Mrs. Helen made 3 crucial calls from the landline in her house, using an address book she hadn't opened in years. The first call was to her former colleague, Attorney Johnson, now a respected member of the Regulatory Council for Social Investments of Colorado. The second, to her niece Amanda, an investigative journalist who worked for The Informer, one of the most important newspapers in Cedar Springs. The third, perhaps the most strategic, was to engineer Stephen Baker, a former student who now formed part of the administrative board of Wilson Enterprises, without Mr. Wilson knowing that his former mentor had been precisely Mrs. Helen. "The gears are in motion," the elderly woman explained to Lucy when they met that afternoon at Sunrise Ranch, pretending to be simply a grandmother taking her adoptive granddaughter to therapy with horses. "Now we must observe and wait. Patience is our best weapon." Meanwhile, in the central offices of Wilson Group, located in an imposing skyscraper in the financial center of Cedar Springs, Mr. Wilson was in a particularly irritable mood. He had spent the morning frantically searching for his USB drive, that small device that contained information that could destroy his reputation and possibly bring him before justice if it fell into the wrong hands. "Morris," he shouted to his personal assistant, a thin man in an impeccable suit who instantly appeared at the door of his luxurious office. "Yes, Mr. Wilson," the assistant responded in a servile tone. "Have you seen my USB drive?" "The black one with the E company logo engraved in silver," the businessman asked as he rummaged for the umpteenth time through the drawers of his mahogany desk. "No, sir. The last time I saw it was yesterday, when you were carrying it in your jacket pocket during the visit to that ranch," Morris responded, visibly tensing at the expression of horror that crossed his boss's face. "Are you telling me I might have lost it there, in that damn place full of peasants and crying children?" Mr. Wilson roared, hitting the desk with such force that the expensive gold pen he had on the documents rolled until falling to the floor. It's possible, sir," stuttered the assistant. "Do you want me to send someone to look for it?" "No, idiot. The last thing we need is to draw attention. I'll go myself tomorrow with some excuse. No one should know what that drive contains," the businessman sentenced, his mind already calculating possible scenarios and how to minimize potential damages. What Mr. Wilson ignored was that, a few blocks from his office, in a discreet cafe, in the historic center, Attorney Johnson and engineer Stephen Baker were meeting with Mrs. Helen, reviewing printed copies of some of the most compromising documents found on the pen drive. "This is pure dynamite, Helen," commented Attorney Johnson, a 60-year-old man with completely white hair and the dignified posture of someone who has spent decades defending the law. "There's enough evidence here to initiate a formal investigation against Wilson and his entire inner circle. But we must be extremely cautious," added Stephen, adjusting his metal-framed glasses. Mr. Wilson has contacts at all levels of government. If we alert the wrong authorities, these documents could mysteriously disappear." Mrs. Helen nodded, slowly savoring her herbal tea. "That's why I've devised a different strategy. We won't go directly after him with a formal complaint, at least not yet. First, we'll corner him from within." The plan she explained next was as ingenious as it was bold. Using his position on the board, Stephen would convene an extraordinary meeting alleging concerns about potential financial irregularities in the company's social projects, without directly mentioning the evidence they had. Simultaneously, Attorney Johnson, from his position on the Regulatory Council, would initiate a routine review of public funds allocated to accessibility projects in the region, specifically those in which Wilson Group had participated as an intermediary. "We'll make him nervous, make him sweat. A nervous man makes mistakes, and those mistakes will give us more ammunition," explained Mrs. Helen, her eyes shining with the shrewdness of someone who has lived long enough to know human nature in depth. "And meanwhile, my niece Amanda will discreetly investigate the backgrounds of his closest associates. There's always a weak link in these chains of corruption." 3 days later, the effects of this strategy began to manifest. Mr. Wilson arrived at his office to find a formal summons from the administrative board on his desk. He barely had time to process it when his phone rang. It was the Regulatory Council requesting an appointment to review the documentation of 5 specific projects, all of them mentioned in the files of the lost pen drive. To make matters worse, his visit to Sunrise Ranch had been fruitless. Not only did he not find his USB drive, but he was received with unusual coldness by Mrs. Sarah and the other organizers, who clearly had not forgotten his behavior during the event. "Something is happening, Morris," he commented to his assistant, while serving himself a double whiskey, despite it being barely 11 in the morning. "I have the feeling that someone is pulling strings against me." While Mr. Wilson began to feel the circle tightening, at Sunrise Ranch, another revolution was gestating, this time in plain sight of everyone. Mrs. Sarah, who had been partially informed by Mrs. Helen about Mr. Wilson's intentions to acquire the land for a tourism project, omitting the fraud part to protect the ongoing operation, had mobilized the community with renewed energy. "If they want to take this space from us, they'll have to face the entire town of Pine Creek," she declared during an emergency community assembly. The response was overwhelming. Entire families offered themselves as volunteers to improve the facilities. A group of local masons donated materials and labor to build additional access ramps. Retired teachers organized free educational workshops. Veterinarians offered pro bono services for the horses. And at the center of all this movement, inspiring without intending to, was Lucy Miller, whose bond with hope had become the living symbol of what the ranch represented for the community. "It's as if the universe were conspiring in our favor," Mrs. Helen commented to Mrs. Sarah as they watched Lucy performing her therapy with hope, now under the attentive guidance of Dr. Michael Anderson, a veterinarian who had developed a specialized equine therapy program. "Each move of Mr. Wilson's sinks him deeper, and each day this place gets stronger." "But I still don't understand why now," Mrs. Sarah responded, visibly confused. "The ranch has been functioning as a community center for barely 6 months. Why does Wilson show interest just now?" Mrs. Helen's eyes shone with mischief. "Because, dear friend, this land has just tripled in value. The federal government will announce next week the construction of a new highway that will connect directly with the road to Mountain View, passing less than a mile from here. Privileged information that our millionaire friend thought to take advantage of before anyone else." The surprise on Mrs. Sarah's face was evident. "How do you know all this?" "Let's say I have my sources," the elderly woman responded with an enigmatic smile. "The important thing is that now we also have privileged information, and we'll use it to protect what's truly valuable. That same night, as the moon illuminated the fields of the ranch with its silver light, Lucy and Mrs. Helen shared a moment of stillness next to the corral where Hope rested. The mare approached the edge of the fence, inclining her head to receive the girl's caresses. "Do you think our plan will work, Mrs. Helen?" Lucy asked, her voice barely audible in the nocturnal tranquility. "It will work, my child," the elderly woman responded with serene confidence. "Men like Mr. Wilson build empires on fear and intimidation, but there's something more powerful than fear: community. And that's what we're building here, a united front that no amount of money will be able to break." As if confirming her words, Mrs. Helen's cell phone vibrated with the arrival of a message. It was from Stephen. "Board meeting scheduled for Friday." RW, visibly agitated, started asking questions about the Regulatory Council's review. Phase 1 successfully completed. Mrs. Helen smiled and put the phone away again. "The pieces are beginning to move exactly as we anticipated," she commented, more to herself than to Lucy. The girl, however, caught the tone of satisfaction in her voice. "And what's next?" she asked with curiosity. "Now, my dear Lucy, we move to phase 2, public pressure," Mrs. Helen responded. "Tomorrow a story will appear in The Informer, written by my niece Amanda. It won't directly mention Mr. Wilson or the documents we have, but it will sow doubts about certain social projects whose results aren't visible in the communities where they were supposedly implemented." And just as she promised, the next day, in the investigative section of the prestigious newspaper, an article appeared titled "The Mystery of the Invisible Millions, Accessibility Funds That Never Reached Their Destination." The report, meticulously documented but cautious in its direct accusations, generated an immediate stir in the business and political circles of Colorado. For Mr. Wilson, it was like receiving a punch to the stomach. Sitting in his office, with the newspaper spread out on his desk, he felt cold sweat running down his back. There were no specific names in the article, but anyone familiar with the sector could connect the dots. And the worst part was that it coincided exactly with the projects that the Regulatory Council had requested to review days before. Coincidence? Impossible. Someone was coordinating these attacks, someone with access to privileged information. "Morris," he called with a tense voice to his assistant, "cancel all my meetings today and contact Attorney Franklin. I need urgent legal advice." While Mr. Wilson desperately began to build a defense against what he perceived as a coordinated attack at Sunrise Ranch, the first formal class of the new expanded equine therapy program was being inaugurated. 12 children with various disabilities, including Lucy, now participated in structured sessions under the supervision of Dr. Michael and a team of trained volunteers. The smiles on the faces of the little ones and the visible relief in the eyes of their parents were the living confirmation that the battle they were fighting was worth every effort. The boardroom on the 30th floor of the Wilson building was an imposing space, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of Cedar Springs. The black marble table, polished until reflecting the faces of those who sat around it, seemed longer and colder than ever today. Mr. Richard Wilson occupied the head, as always, but something in his usually dominant posture seemed slightly diminished. His eyes, usually cold and calculating, nervously scanned the faces of the 12 members of the administrative board of his business empire. The extraordinary meeting, convened by engineer Stephen Baker, had begun 20 minutes ago, and with each second that passed, Mr. Wilson felt control of the situation slipping through his fingers like fine sand. "As I was saying, board members," Stephen continued with a calm but firm voice, "the discrepancies found in the financial reports of the last 5 social projects are not mere administrative irregularities. We're talking about approximately $6 million that were allocated to accessibility and inclusion initiatives, but whose final destination is not clearly documented in our records." A murmur of concern ran through the room. Several board members exchanged uneasy looks while reviewing the folders with documentation that Stephen had distributed at the beginning of the meeting. Mr. Wilson cleared his throat, trying to regain control. Engineer Baker, I appreciate your diligence in this matter, but I think you're exaggerating the situation. As you well know, many of these projects are executed by third parties, and the final reports sometimes take time to reach our central accounting. The smile that Stephen directed at him was loaded with superficial respect that barely hid something more. Of course, Mr. Wilson, I perfectly understand how these processes work. Precisely for that reason, I took the liberty of directly contacting those third parties you mentioned. Curiously, 3 of the 5 executing organizations claim never to have received more than 20% of the allocated funds. The remaining 80%, according to their records, was redirected by superior orders. Mr. Wilson's face visibly paled. That's absurd. There must be some misunderstanding. Perhaps, intervened attorney Monica Reynolds, one of the most respected board members, but the fact is that it perfectly coincides with what was published in the Informer a few days ago. And now we have the Regulatory Council requesting an exhaustive review of those same projects. We cannot ignore these signs, Mr. Wilson. The reputation of Wilson Group is at stake. The meeting extended for 3 more hours, during which Mr. Wilson desperately tried to divert attention, minimize the accusations, and blame absent subordinates. But with each weak argument, with each improvised explanation, he lost more of the board's confidence. Finally, a decision was made. An internal investigation committee would be formed, an independent external audit would be contracted, and what hurt the proud businessman most, Mr. Wilson would be temporarily removed from any decision related to social projects until the situation was clarified. Upon leaving the room, Stephen Baker pretended to review some documents while discreetly dialing a number on his phone. When he heard Mrs. Helen's voice on the other end of the line, he whispered, "Mission accomplished. The board is alarmed, and Mr. Wilson has been partially neutralized. It's only a matter of time before the entire structure begins to crumble." Meanwhile, miles away, at Sunrise Ranch, an amazing transformation was taking place. What just a week before was a modest community center, now buzzed with activity and renewed hope. The news that the place was threatened by the real estate interests of Wilson Group had spread like wildfire through Pine Creek and neighboring towns, triggering an unprecedented wave of solidarity. Mrs. Sarah could hardly believe the community's response. That morning, while supervising the construction of a new access ramp, a gift from the local association of builders, she commented with amazement to Mrs. Helen, "It's as if the whole town had decided to adopt the ranch. I've never seen anything like this in my 30 years working on community projects." The elderly woman smiled, observing the comings and goings of volunteers. "It's that people defend what they love, Sarah. And this place has won the hearts of many, especially since the stories of Lucy and other children began to circulate." She wasn't exaggerating. In the main corral, Lucy now directed a small group of children with various disabilities in a session of approaching horses. With surprising maturity for her 12 years, she explained to each child how to approach the animal, how to earn its trust, how to communicate without words. Hope remained calm, while small hands caressed her with initial timidity that soon transformed into confidence. "Look at them," Mrs. Helen whispered to her friend. "How could anyone want to destroy this to build a luxury hotel and golf courses?" The answer came in the form of a black luxury car that stopped in front of the main entrance. From it descended Mr. Richard Wilson, visibly altered and without his usual entourage of assistants. "Speaking of the devil," murmured Mrs. Sarah, visibly tensing, "stay here with the children. I'll handle this." But before she could advance toward the newcomer, Mrs. Helen stopped her gently. "No, Let me. I think the time has come for us to formally introduce ourselves. Mr. Wilson advanced in large strides along the main path, ignoring volunteers and visitors who looked at him with suspicion. His objective was clear: the administrative office, where he hoped to find those responsible for the place. However, his path was intercepted by an older woman with silver hair and dignified posture, who planted herself in front of him with the firmness of a centuries-old oak. "Mr. Richard Wilson, what a surprise to see you here again," Mrs. Helen greeted with a serene smile that contrasted with the hardness of her gaze. "Do we know each other?" the businessman asked, disconcerted but impatient. "Not officially, but let's say I've followed your career with great interest," the elderly woman responded. "My name is Helen Robinson. I witnessed your behavior during the charity event when you spat in front of a girl in a wheelchair and mistreated one of our horses." Mr. Wilson's face contorted in a grimace of contempt. "I don't have time for complaints from an old woman. I'm looking for the person in charge of this place. I have a business proposal to make." "A proposal?" Mrs. Helen repeated, as if savoring the words. "Are you referring to your plan to convert this community center into a luxury tourism complex? Or perhaps to your strategy to divert funds destined for accessibility programs to your personal accounts?" The blood left the businessman's face so quickly that for a moment Mrs. Helen feared he might faint right there. "What? How?" he stammered, unable to articulate a complete sentence. "Coincidences are fascinating, don't you think?" the elderly woman continued, secretly enjoying the moment. "A small object falls from your pocket, rolls to the appropriate feet, and suddenly, carefully guarded secrets are exposed." Understanding hit Mr. Wilson like lightning. You have my USB drive," he affirmed, his voice barely a harsh whisper. "Had," Mrs. Helen corrected calmly. "Now, its contents are being analyzed by people very interested in knowing how public funds destined for social projects have really been used." The businessman took a threatening step toward her, but stopped upon noticing that several volunteers were observing the scene with attention. "This is a crime. You're violating my privacy, stealing confidential information," he hissed, trying to intimidate her. "The man who has diverted millions destined for children with disabilities speaks of crimes," Mrs. Helen responded without flinching. "What an interesting interpretation of morality, Mr. Wilson." For a moment, it seemed the businessman was going to explode with fury, but then something unexpected happened. A small hand took Mrs. Helen's. It was Lucy, who had observed the scene from afar and decided to approach upon noticing the growing tension. "Is everything okay, Mrs. Helen?" the girl asked, looking directly into Mr. Wilson's eyes without a trace of fear. "This gentleman was about to leave, my child," the elderly woman responded, gently squeezing Lucy's hand. "He has understood that he has nothing to do here." The girl's presence seemed to deflate something in Mr. Wilson. His gaze traveled around the environment. The volunteers working, the children with the horses, the families gathered sharing hope. For an instant, a flash of something resembling shame crossed his face, quickly replaced by a mask of cold determination. "This isn't over," he warned before turning around and heading to his car. "It's over more than you think," Mrs. Helen murmured, as she watched him walk away. "And it's just beginning for us." That night, in his mansion in the exclusive Oak Ridge Hills neighborhood, Mr. Wilson faced the most serious crisis of his career. His lawyer, Attorney Franklin, had communicated alarming news. The Regulatory Council had not only found irregularities in the 5 projects initially investigated, but had expanded the review to all social programs managed by Wilson Group in the last 5 years. "It's a disaster, Mr. Wilson," the lawyer explained, while serving generous amounts of cognac in 2 cut crystal glasses. They have internal documents, emails, bank transfers. Someone has provided them with a practically complete case. That damned old woman and the girl in the wheelchair, the businessman muttered, drinking the liquor in one gulp. Somehow they got my USB drive and have leaked everything. Attorney Franklin raised his eyebrows, surprised. You had all that sensitive information on such a vulnerable device? Unencrypted? I don't need your reproaches now, Mr. Wilson exploded, smashing the glass against the fireplace. I need solutions. What options do we have? The lawyer sighed, adjusting his glasses. Frankly, they're limited. The case is solid. We could try to discredit the evidence, allege it was obtained illegally, but with the press already involved and your own company's board, questioning the finances, it's an uphill battle. There's always a way out, Mr. Wilson insisted, nervously pacing the luxurious room. I could offer a substantial donation, announce a new commitment to social causes, give a press conference, explaining that it was all an administrative misunderstanding. It could partially work, the lawyer conceded, but you would need something more concrete, a significant gesture that demonstrates a genuine change of attitude. Mr. Wilson stopped in front of the window that dominated the illuminated city. His calculating mind began to formulate a plan. It wouldn't be the one he had originally imagined, but perhaps, just perhaps, he could turn this crisis into an opportunity for public redemption. Sunrise Ranch, he murmured, more to himself than to his lawyer. What about that place? Attorney Franklin asked, confused by the change of topic. Perhaps it's time for Wilson Group to make a substantial donation to a successful community project, Mr. Wilson responded, a calculating smile slowly forming on his lips. A donation that guarantees its long-term operation and, incidentally, cleans the image of the company. And mine. What Mr. Wilson couldn't imagine was that, at that precise moment, miles away, Mrs. Helen and Lucy shared a moment of stillness, under the stars, sitting on the porch of the modest Miller home. Do you think he'll come back to bother us, Mrs. Helen? The girl asked, her voice barely a whisper in the quiet night. Oh, he'll return, my child, the elderly woman responded with serene certainty, but not in the way he himself expects. Sometimes, the most unlikely people end up being instruments of good, even against their own will. The wisdom in those words floated in the night air like a silent promise, while the stars shone over Pine Creek, eternal witnesses of how the small actions of brave people can change the course of stories that seemed already written in stone. The morning that would forever change the destiny of Sunrise Ranch dawned with a perfectly blue sky over Pine Creek. The place buzzed with activity, families with excited children, volunteers preparing the spaces, and horses that seemed to feel the special energy of the day. Mrs. Sarah supervised the preparations to receive the 25 children who would participate in the equine therapy sessions, a number that had grown exponentially thanks to the community mobilization. I never imagined we would get this far in such a short time, she commented, observing with pride the space that just a month ago had been threatened. At her side, Dr. Michael reviewed the files, adapting the activities to the needs of each child. It's the power of a united community, the veterinarian responded. When people find a cause they really care about, they're capable of moving mountains. Or stopping an all-powerful businessman, added Mrs. Helen, joining the conversation with Lucy, who greeted Hope from a distance with a radiant smile. The mayor responded with a soft neigh, recognizing her young friend. Stephen called me last night, Mrs. Helen informed in a low voice. The administrative board of Wilson Group has scheduled a press conference for noon today. We should be alert. The morning passed among children's laughter and the satisfying work of seeing progress in each participant. Lucy had become a natural assistant, guiding the youngest or most fearful in their first approach to the horses. She has a special gift, Dr. Michael commented, as they watched her help a child caress Hope. It's not just her connection with the horses, it's her empathy with the other children. At noon, Mrs. Helen discreetly headed to the office where she tuned into the press conference. Mr. Wilson appeared on screen, flanked by board members, looking unusually sober and humble. After an exhaustive internal review, he declared, "We have identified administrative irregularities in our social projects. As executive president, I assume total responsibility." He announced a plan that included the return of funds, permanent external audits, and citizen oversight committees. But it was his final announcement that left Mrs. Helen speechless. Wilson Group has decided to create the Hope Foundation for Inclusion, which will begin with a donation of $10 million destined to guarantee the long-term operation of Sunrise Ranch, this extraordinary center that offers free equine therapy to children with disabilities. When she shared the news, the initial reaction was disbelief. $10 million, Mrs. Sarah repeated. Why? This is the same man who spat in front of Lucy. People can change when they face the consequences of their actions, Mrs. Helen responded, although she knew the change had more to do with saving his reputation than with a genuine moral transformation. The important thing is that the ranch is safe. Lucy received the news with surprising calm. It was the right thing, she said simply, not for him, but for Hope and all the children who will come after. The wisdom in those words, pronounced with the simplicity of childhood but with unusual depth, moved the elderly woman to tears. At 4 p.m, a single car stopped in front of the entrance. Mr. Wilson descended, accompanied only by Stephen Baker and an assistant. His entrance so different from his first ostentatious visit that many exchanged looks of surprise. The formal act was brief. He delivered a symbolic check, announced the details of the foundation, and requested to meet each child in the program. When it was Lucy's turn, an expectant silence fell over those present. "You're Lucy," he said, not as a question, but as recognition. "I've seen your work with the other children. It's impressive." "Thank you," she responded with simplicity. "Hope does most of it. I just help a little." A fleeting smile, perhaps the first genuine one in a long time, crossed Mr. Wilson's face. He leaned slightly and spoke in a low voice. "Sometimes we learn the most important lessons in the most painful ways. Thank you for being part of mine." He didn't explicitly apologize, but his tone conveyed an acknowledgement of error that surprised those who managed to hear him. The following weeks were of accelerated transformation. With the foundation's resources, the facilities improved. Specialized personnel was hired, more horses were acquired, and accommodations were built for families from distant communities. The story of the small community center that had resisted the onslaughts of a powerful businessman inspired similar initiatives in other places. Mrs. Helen found a new vocation as an informal advisor, ensuring that each dollar was used with transparency and efficiency. "I never imagined that at 75 years old I would start a new career," she commented with humor to Mrs. Sarah. Mr. Wilson himself had changed. His bi-weekly visits were discreet and respectful, and over time, the families accepted him as part of the community. One Sunday afternoon, 6 months later, Lucy was resting next to the corral when she saw Mr. Wilson approaching, dressed with simplicity in jeans and a shirt. "Do you mind if I sit?" he asked with a shy smile. For a few minutes they remained in silence, observing Hope. "You know," he finally said, "when I was a child, my grandfather had horses. I spent hours watching them, fascinated by their elegance and their ability to communicate without words." "And what happened?" Lucy asked. "Life happened," he responded with a sigh. "I became obsessed with success and power. I forgot what really made me happy. Until I saw you with Hope that day and felt envy of that pure connection that I had lost." "It's never too late to remember," Lucy responded. Hope accepts everyone equally. She doesn't care who you are, just how you treat her now. Do you think I could learn to connect with her like you? He asked, with unexpected vulnerability. Lucy's smile illuminated her face. Of course, I can teach you. In the distance, Mrs. Helen observed the scene with satisfaction. Her gaze rested on the new plaque at the entrance, Sunrise Ranch Equine Therapy Center, a place where dignity begins and hope is reborn. Next to it, a photograph showed Lucy on Hope, living symbols of how determination can transform adverse situations. The story would continue to be written day by day, with each recovered smile, each therapeutic advance, each life touched by the magic of the connection between humans and horses. And in its foundations would always remain the extraordinary lesson of how a girl in a wheelchair, a retired teacher, and a sweet-eyed mare had changed not only a physical space, but the very heart of a community and of a man who believed he had lost everything, only to discover that he was just beginning to find himself. Dear listeners, we hope that the story of Lucy and Mr. Wilson has deeply moved you. This transformation that we have witnessed at Sunrise Ranch reminds us that there is always room for redemption, change, and hope. To continue this emotional journey, we have prepared a special list with equally captivating stories about personal transformations and communities united for noble causes. Find it here by clicking to your left. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give the video a like. Each day we bring new narratives that explore the complexity of American life with characters who could be our neighbors, relatives, or even ourselves. Do you know any real story similar to that of Sunrise Ranch? Or have you experienced a personal transformation as profound as Mr. Wilson's? Tell us in the comments. We love reading your experiences and connecting with you through these shared stories. Remember that with each like and subscription, you help us bring these narratives of hope to more people. We'll be waiting for you in the upcoming episodes with more stories that will inspire, move, and remind us of the transformative power of compassion.